People have asked this question for a long time. It's one of those bits of Elvis lore that floats around. You hear it from a friend or read it in a book somewhere. The story goes that there was one specific song, one of his big hits from his comeback period, that his father, Vernon, just couldn't handle. Every time it came on the radio, he'd have to leave the room, or he'd just sit there and the tears would start to fall. So, was it that song, the one about the little boy talking to his dad? The short answer is yes. It almost certainly was. But the short answer doesn't really tell you anything. It doesn't explain the why. And the why is a story about poverty and loss and a love so deep it carved out a hole in a man's soul that never quite filled back in. To understand why a simple pop song could break a grown man's heart, you have to understand Vernon Presley. And you have to understand who he lost. Vernon Presley was not a complicated man. He was born in Fulton, Mississippi in 1916. He was a quiet man, a working man. He did what he had to do to get by. He worked on farms, he drove trucks, he did whatever job he could find. Life was hard. The world he was born into was one where you didn't expect much, and you were rarely disappointed. He was tall and handsome in his youth, but life wore him down, etched lines of worry on his face early on. He wasn't a man of big words or grand gestures. His love was a quiet, steady thing. And the center of his universe was Gladys Smith. Gladys was vibrant, she was full of life and laughter, but also full of anxiety. She was a worrier. She and Vernon met and fell in love, a simple, pure kind of love. They married in 1933. He was 17, she was 21. They had nothing. They lived in a two-room house in Tupelo that Vernon and his brother built with their own hands. It was more of a shack, really, but it was theirs. In 1935, Gladys was pregnant. With twins. This was the hope, the dream. In that little house, with no money and not much of a future, this was every family. On January 8th, the first boy was born, Jesse Garon. He was stillborn. It was a tragedy that would haunt them forever. 30 minutes later, his brother arrived, Elvis Aaron. You can't overstate what this did to them. They had one son, but they had also lost one. For the rest of her life, Gladys felt that loss. She poured all of her love, all of her fear, all of her hopes for two sons into the one she had left. Vernon felt it too. The ghost of that first son was always there, a quiet sadness in the corner of their lives. They buried Jesse in an unmarked grave in the local cemetery. They never forgot him. Vernon, Gladys, and Elvis were a tight little unit. Incredibly close. They were the three of them against the world. And Vernon worked, but jobs were scarce and pay was low. At one point he was sent to prison for 8 months over a forged check for a few dollars. It was a desperate time. While he was gone, Gladys and little Elvis had to move in with relatives. The shame and the fear of that time never left them. When Vernon got out, he was even more determined to protect his family. His love for Elvis was immense, but it was filtered through his quiet nature. Well, he wasn't the doting, effusive parent. Gladys was. Vernon was the steady, worried presence in the background. He was the one who bought Elvis his first guitar, maybe to steer him away from the rifle he wanted. He was the one who co-signed the contract with Sun Records. He was proud, but he was also terrified. This world of music and fame was so far from anything he'd ever known. Then came the money, and the fame, and Graceland. They moved from a shotgun shack to a mansion, but inside those gates they were still the same three people from Tupelo. Vernon, Gladys, and Elvis. The world outside changed, but the world inside was supposed to stay the same. But it didn't. Fame was hard on Gladys. She was a simple country woman. She didn't like the crowds, the screaming girls, the constant attention. She was proud of her son, but she was also losing him to the world. She became lonely. She stayed home in Graceland, a palace that must have felt like a prison sometimes. She worried constantly. When Elvis was drafted into the army in 1958, it broke her heart. She was terrified for him. Her health, which was never great, began to decline rapidly. She had been taking diet pills, and she drank to ease her anxiety. Her liver was failing. In August of 1958, while Elvis was on leave from basic training, Gladys died. She was only 46 years old. The devastation was absolute. It shattered the family. Elvis was inconsolable. His wails of grief at her funeral are the stuff of legend. He felt like his whole world had ended. And for Vernon, the love of his life was gone. The woman he had built that little house for, the woman who had stood by him through jail and poverty, the mother of his sons, was gone. For Vernon and Elvis were adrift. They were two men rattling around a giant, empty house, bound together by a grief that was too big for words. Vernon tried to manage Elvis's finances. He tried to be the solid rock, but he was just as broken. He was a man who had lost a son at birth, and now he had lost his wife. All he had left was Elvis. The weight of that must have been immense. Years passed. Elvis came home from the army, made movies, and became a different kind of star. Vernon eventually remarried a woman named Dee Stanley, but his bond with Elvis remained the most important thing in his life. He lived at Graceland, a constant quiet presence. He watched his son's life unfold, the good and the bad. He saw the prescription drugs, the isolation, the pressures of being Elvis. He worried. He was always worrying. Now let's jump forward to 1969. Elvis was in the middle of a massive comeback. He was done with the silly movies and the mediocre soundtracks. He had done the 68 comeback special, reminding the world that he was still the king. He was hungry again. He went back to Memphis, his hometown, to record. Not at Sun, where it all started, but at a place called American Sound Studio. Now, this is a gritty, soulful place. The house band, known as the Memphis Boys, was legendary. They played on hits for Dusty Springfield, Neil Diamond, and the Box Tops. The producer, Chips Moman, was a genius. He pushed Elvis. He wasn't a yes man. He wanted raw, real emotion, and Elvis gave it to him. The sessions were magical. Songs like Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto came out of these recordings. Elvis was singing with a power and a depth he hadn't shown in years. He was singing about real life, real pain. One of the songwriters who brought material to the studio was Mac Davis. He was a young, talented writer from Texas. He brought in a song he had written. It was a simple story, told from a child's perspective. The song starts with a little boy. He wakes up in the morning and sees his father. His father is sad. He's looking at a picture, and he's crying. The boy doesn't quite understand adult grief, but he understands sadness. He knows his dad is hurting, and he knows it has to do with his mommy. The boy tries to comfort his father. He puts his arms around his neck. He tells him he still has him. He asks him to think of all the fun things they can do together. He's trying, in his small, innocent way, to pull his father out of the darkness. He says they can do all the things they used to do with his mommy. Then comes the part that must have felt like a punch to the gut for Vernon Presley. The little boy in the song says that his mommy told him a story. She told him that every time a loved one dies, a star appears in the sky. He tells his dad to look up at the sky. He says maybe, just maybe. That star he sees isn't just a star. Maybe it's his mommy looking down on them. It's a beautiful, heartbreaking image. A child's simple explanation for an unbearable loss. It's a way of keeping the person alive, of making the goodbye less final. And then there's another layer. The little boy says that he and his little brother can have fun with their dad. He mentions another child, a brother. He says, "You still have me and little brother Tommy." It's a small detail in the song's narrative, but in the context of the Presley family, it's not a small detail at all. Elvis recorded the song. He sang it with a tenderness and a sadness that felt deeply personal. It wasn't just another ballad. You can hear the ache in his voice. He wasn't just performing a song, he was telling a story that he understood in his bones. He knew what it was like to be a son trying to navigate a parent's grief. He knew what it was like to live in a house where a mother's presence was gone, but her memory filled every room. Now imagine Vernon Presley hearing this for the first time. Maybe he was in the studio during a playback. Maybe he heard it on the radio in his office at Graceland. It doesn't matter where. Just picture him. A quiet, aging man, a man who had already buried so much. He hears his son's voice, that famous voice, singing a story that is almost his own. He hears the part about the little boy comforting his father. He would remember Elvis, that little boy in Tupelo, his only surviving son, his whole world after Gladys was gone. He would remember the years after her death, the two of them alone in that big house trying to figure out how to go on without her. He hears the lyrics about the father looking at a picture of the mother. Vernon was surrounded by pictures of Gladys. Her portrait hung in Graceland. Her memory was carefully preserved, almost like a shrine. He lived with her ghost every single day. He hears the part about the star in the sky being the mommy looking down. A simple, sweet, and devastatingly sad idea. The kind of thing a child would say. The kind of thing that could break a grieving man's heart because it's so full of innocent hope. For Vernon, Gladys was his star. She was the one. And now she was gone, somewhere up there looking down. And then he hears the line about the brother. The song says, "Me and little brother Tommy." But for Vernon, the name wasn't Tommy. It was Jesse, the son he never knew. The twin brother Elvis never got to meet. The first great loss of his life. The song suddenly wasn't just about the loss of Gladys, it was about the loss of Jesse too. It was about his entire family, the one he had and the one he lost. It was a song about a father, a surviving son, a dead mother, and a dead brother. It was the entire tragedy of the Presley family condensed into a 3-minute pop song. It wasn't just a story, it was his story, sung by his son, broadcast to the whole world, a private grief made public. Of course he cried, how could he not? It wasn't just a sad song, it was a mirror. Every note, every word, reflected his own deepest pain. It brought everything back. The little house in Tupelo, the stillborn baby in the unmarked grave, the years of struggle, the joy of watching his son become a star, the terrible, empty silence after Gladys was gone. It was all there. People around Elvis and Vernon knew. The story got out. This was the one. The song that Vernon couldn't listen to, it became part of the legend. It humanized them both. It reminded people that behind the gold records and the sold-out concerts and the Graceland gates, there was a real family with real heartbreak. A father who missed his wife, a son who missed his mother. The song became a massive hit. Millions of people heard it. For them, it was a touching, sentimental song about loss. It might have made them think of their own loved ones. It might have brought a tear to their eye. But for Vernon Presley, it was something else entirely. It was the sound of his own life. The sound of his own heartbreaking over and over again every time he heard it. So yes, it was that song. The song that laid the Presley family's private sorrow bare for the world to see, all through the innocent eyes of a child trying to make his father feel better. The song was, of course, Don't Cry Daddy.